Like slippery little sneak thieves, Wizards of the Coast is running away with the Upkeep phase! Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, and welcome to my video on the curious disappearance, really, of the Upkeep phase. What we're going to talk about is the way the Upkeep phase has been shifting. Basically, what I originally was going to do was I was going to be talking about a new red card that I'm really excited about. We're going to save that. We're going to talk about that really soon. But reading the bottom of the card, I noticed that it said at the end of turn. So instead of this felt like a card that normally would have been an upkeep effect, and it got me thinking about the upkeep and how it feels like cards like Helm of the Host and things like that are kind of moving in on its territory. So I thought this was a very interesting concept to discuss. Now let me state at the beginning, because I know people like to get worked up, nitpick about different things. The actual upkeep phase can't be removed from Magic the Gathering. So we're not talking about a situation where the upkeep phase no longer technically exists, but we can reach the point where it may as well be like that, because Wizards of the Coast is no longer making cards that interact with the upkeep. If there aren't cards that say upkeep on them, then the only time the upkeep is going to get interacted with is when someone knows the rules well enough to say, hold on, during the upkeep step, before this happens, I'm going to do X. That's a scenario we're looking at. So the upkeep is being referenced fewer and fewer times in the cards. I went and did the research on this. I started out with Core 2019. Now I had to bear in mind that because we're talking about Core 2019, this is a beginner set. So by necessity, maybe they're going to minimize the amount of upkeep interactions to reduce the amount of complexity that we're dealing with here. Because before, everything used to happen in the upkeep. There were all kinds of different abilities that were all relegated to happening during the upkeep. Now, Wizards of the Coast has slackened on that, and actually, I think it's a good change. It makes some cards more exciting, more useful. Let's use some cards as examples here. Like Skyrider Patrol is an example of a card that in the past would have been something that actually happened during the upkeep. The way that this card currently works is at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay a green and a blue. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control, and that creature gains flying until end of turn. This sort of effect used to be relegated to the upkeep. You would see it on older cards like Mirror Prototype from Mirrodin, that kind of card that would just trigger during the upkeep. Now, if they made Mirror Prototype now, this feels like they would change that to triggering at the beginning of combat. Now that's a nice feeling, honestly, because functionally it's not that much of a difference. It does make the creature bigger a little bit faster. Like if you put out the Mirror Prototype before your attack phase on your turn, even though you can't attack with it the turn it comes out, it's going to grow bigger, which is a nice feeling, and you didn't have to wait until the upkeep. And there's no mechanical reason that it has to wait to the upkeep. And when you're talking about a creature getting bigger power and toughness, it makes perfect sense to tie it to the combat phase. This is a smart move. On top of that, let's take a second to appreciate the artwork on this card. This is literally an elven archer riding a giant flying sky manta. This looks so cool! And on top of that, it transmits the concept of green and blue together perfectly. You got your blue manta, your sea creature, you got your elvish guy, your green creature, together in harmony. So I really enjoy the way this card transmits that concept. But I just wanted to use an example of how now, instead of having this happen during the upkeep, they have this happening at the beginning of combat. There's another switch where you'll see things where, let's talk about Ajani's Ultimate. Ajani's Ultimate gives you an emblem that says at the beginning of your end step, create 3 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. Previously, this would have been an ability that definitely triggered during your upkeep. Upkeep was where all these effects happened, okay? That's how that went. Now, there are some cards in Core 2019 that do specifically reference the upkeep and belong there and make sense. Liliana's Contract is actually the perfect kind of poster card for the type of card that makes sense to have triggering during the upkeep. And that is the one where you have to have 4 demons to win the game, and it triggers at the beginning of your upkeep if you have those 4 demons. So that's excellent because it gives your opponent time to answer that. It's not like you can just put out the demon and then go, oh, look, at the beginning of my combat, if I control 4 demons, I win. At the end of the turn, again, it can just be like, near the end of my turn, demon, enchantment, win kind of deal. So the upkeep is useful in regards to giving a sort of like a buffer for people to respond to it. But it's another reason, actually, that buffer of response is another reason I believe they've moved away from putting so many cards in the upkeep. I think, now I could be wrong, but I think part of this is actually based on Commander, because this problem becomes far more obvious when you're dealing with Commander. Waiting until your next upkeep when you're playing a 2-player game is just, okay, you go, then here comes my upkeep. But depending on the number of players, there could be X number of turns to answer cards, right? And that with cards like Liliana's Contract, great. In a multiplayer game, everyone has a chance to try and stop the win condition. But when it's just a creature that's going to get a +1/+1 boost, or you're going to be able to get some kind of like destroy effect out of it, but you got to wait until the next up. It basically creates an extra restriction and makes cards worse, and it scales based on the size of the game. But when you can get that first effect right away, either right at your combat phase, right at the end of your turn, things like that, then it makes those cards a little more palatable, a little more enjoyable. So I decided, okay, I looked at Core 2019, and it only had 4 cards that mention the upkeep. There are only 4 cards in all of 2019 that mention upkeep. So I thought to myself, this is a base beginner set. Maybe this is intentional. Maybe they're just doing that here. So I took a step back to the previous set, took a look at Dominaria, right? Now, if you look at Dominaria, there's actually only 3 cards that mention the upkeep, but there's a bunch of cards that normally would be upkeep cards. Things like Helm of the Host, which trigger at the beginning of combat, which feels so much better. Honestly, I got one in my pre-release kit, and I thought it said upkeep because I'm so used to all those cards being upkeep. This shift of making all these cards come trigger at different phases is new, and I like it. It makes the cards feel better. So Helm of the Host is a great example of that. Also, if you look at the sagas are interesting because they trigger right after your draw. So it's not, but that normally, the saga increasing lore counters totally would have been an upkeep effect. So then, obviously, looking at the information going, well, these last couple of sets, we're dealing with a situation where there's only 3 or 4 cards mentioning the upkeep. Am I misremembering the past? Do older sets not have a lot of upkeep triggers? And so I tried to think to myself, off the top of my head, what's a set that I can think of that's fairly old school, decent amount back in Magic history, that would probably have a significant amount of cards that cared about the upkeep, and so we'd be able to take a look at that. And what I randomly picked off the top of my head was Mirrodin. So I went over and checked Mirrodin. There are 20 cards that mention the upkeep. Now, 4 of those are not like triggered upkeep abilities like the type we're talking about. Some of them are untap upkeep abilities, which don't matter. And 2 of them are old school style, like Nim Devourer. We'll talk about Nim Devourer here, where basically the only thing that matters on Nim Devourer that we're going to talk about is the ability 2 black, return Nim Devourer from your graveyard to play, sacrifice a creature, play this ability only during your upkeep. Now, they've changed this. Now you'll see abilities like this worded the way it's worded on Dread Wanderer from Amonkhet. So instead of this happening during the upkeep, this is ability you can activate only as a sorcery. So Dread Wanderer comes back from the graveyard just like the Nim Devourer does. However, this one can be activated anytime a sorcery speed. So it's still got a very similar restriction. And you'll see that on a lot of these cards. Cards that used to say during the upkeep now say only on your turn, only at sorcery speed. Those style restrictions. So there are 16 cards in total that trigger at the beginning of the upkeep in just Mirrodin, not the entire Mirrodin block, Mirrodin all by itself. That's obviously a significant, a staggering difference. And when I looked over these different cards that trigger at the beginning of the upkeep, a lot of them could easily have been parsed out to different portions of the turn. And I like that. It actually it adds more interaction to different parts of the turns. And the upkeep phase it's almost like a vestigial tale for Magic. At this point, obviously, it's not something that we can get rid of. It has function in the game, and there are a lot of cards that mention it. But it's not... Like, basically, it was born out of almost flavor. The idea behind the upkeep is like, okay, you've got to pay your upkeep on these magical spells. It was used back in the day on cards like Force of Nature. Big creatures that were insanely... Like, the Force of Nature is such an insane, like, concentrated green magic essence of nature that you have to constantly pour green magic into it to sustain its being, or it'll just start like railing on you and go out of control. That's the kind of deal, right? So that all happens during the upkeep phase, because flavorfully they felt like that's what they needed. But we can see there's ways to move this all around. They could easily have said at the beginning of your main phase, pay this or it happens. At the end of your draw step. Like, there's all these different areas where the upkeep things can be moved to different areas. And that's what Wizards of the Coast is doing. And it's a smart move, honestly. I believe that it's confirmed as well when you take a look at the quick reference guide. When it comes to teaching new players how to play Magic the Gathering, or guys, whenever you're trying to teach people how to do anything new, you want to keep it as simple as possible. And you can see that demonstrated right here, where they have the parts. Like, when it talks about parts of the turn, they give you the bare minimum information required. So when they're talking about the draw step, it just says draw a card from your library. It doesn't say anything about how if you can't draw a card, you lose, running out of a deck or anything like that. And when it says how to win, all it says how to win is each player starts with 20 life. You win if you reduce your opponent's life total to 0. Now, we all know there are other ways to win, but the point of this document is to give you the absolute minimum amount of information to be able to play Magic. Now, what's really interesting to note is that of every step or phase on this entire sheet, the upkeep right here, the upkeep step, if you can see that, is actually blank. There's no information about it. It's just on, it's only on here so that if they happen to have a card that says upkeep, they're not confused and go, but it's not even listed as part of the turn. Like, Wizards of the Coast's advice about what to tell new players about the upkeep is nothing. So that's a key indicator to me as well, that they are slowly but surely, boom, just cutting out the upkeep here and there, bit by bit by bit. I mean, if we're getting 3 cards out of a set, you get a 200, 300 card set, you're only looking at 1.5% of the cards even referencing the upkeep. So this, to me, I mean, like I said, they can't remove upkeep from the game completely. It's not possible. It's intrinsic to the game. It's something that's mentioned on too many cards. I can't see them trying to come up with some kind of workaround. But going forward, I see the upkeep being mentioned less and less, to the point where we may have sets that have no cards that mention the upkeep. And it may even get to the point where there are no cards that mention upkeep in standard at all. So you may be playing games of Magic and you go for like a year without even hearing the concept of upkeep. And to me, it doesn't seem like we're going to lose anything if that happens. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I like saying that because I can point down where my sack is located. You know who's not a ball sack, though? I'll tell you who's not. Hakamoto! Thanks for joining my Patreon and becoming one of the Golden Lords of Purple. You will see your name in the end scroll, good sir. And those of you who are not on board, get on board, because it's a good time. I want to see 1 billion names at the end of my videos. I want my videos to be 50 minutes long and just names. All right, my friends, thanks for coming by. See you later.
And together, we are the sixth color of magic.